to Dr. Zhang. Thank you so much today, Dr. Zhang, and the floor is over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I think I need your permission to share screen. Okay, yeah. Do you see my screen now? Okay, good. Let me see if can you still see my screen if I play it? Okay. Let me position this so I can still see most of you at least in the image. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you guys about the pilot study. And we had a similar event in the spring. It was a really good experience. I remember a few of you were actually there too. I'm glad that you decided to come again. Hopefully, we can have a good conversation, a little bit, similar to the summer, maybe similar to what we talk about in the spring, but hopefully you get some new insight as well from each other. And so let me just also introduce me a little bit. Some of you have worked with me or attended some of my classes. And I know some of it, we haven't really talked to each other. My research is about the learning sciences, especially about knowledge building in classroom. So I work with elementary grade, like a 5th grade, to restructure science curriculum. And also recently work with high school to integrate research experience in high school classes. And in this a pedagogy called knowledge building, basically transform classroom into a collaborative space where students really develop their ideas, solve problems, and help each other learn, but also like advance knowledge together. And we create technology, create analytics to support student reflection, collaboration, self-assessment, collaborative assessment with data analytics. So that's the project we have been doing in collaboration with elementary schools and secondary schools. And I also work, of course, at the college level in my own teaching, like the 20 years in ETAP 1683. I work a lot on teacher learning as well, especially recently. And the important service to the field of learning sciences, I'm currently co-editing the Journal of Learning Sciences together with Dr. Susan Giroux, a professor at University of Colorado, Boulder. And Tom actually played a big role in the editorial team, helping us handling a lot of daily communication with authors. So that's what the most important things I handle, on a daily basis in my research and in my service. Now, talking about this workshop, I have a few things I plan, and I want to leave enough time for our conversation. And first, I want to talk about the role of pilot studies. Why do we need to do pilot study as a researcher? So this is more broader than this particular milestone in our ETAP program. It's really about how we use pilot study as an important tool to develop our research ideas and preparing us for the major research project. And the second, understand the pilot study milestone. This is more specific to the student in our ETAP program. And but the format and the ways to think about it may be helpful for I know Jennifer, maybe for literacy background as well. Let's see if hopefully you can find something relevant. And I'm going to share a few suggestions, and then we can have a discussion together. So let's talk about the role of a pilot study. And as a researcher, especially like an educational researcher, we handle a lot in our research design and implementation. In the broader field of academia, And a lot of people will say education research is soft, not as hard as nanoscience or as the quantum physics or quantum computing, all those like even AI. A lot of exciting research area out there, and they tend to brag them as the hard, challenging science, making like groundbreaking new discoveries. But I would say like education research probably is the hardest science. Hard in the sense it's difficult, but also hard in the sense of its deep contribution if you do it well. Because it shape the way to nurture and educate future generations, right? Which is a core of our social progress. And everything eventually is about how, about the people, like how they are going to be in the field, whether it's doing the material science or like doing medical, being a member of the medical field. So education research is in a lot of ways more complex than like natural sciences. That's why we need to think about it strategically. And yeah, in my courses, I know a few of you have taken ETAP 826, which is a mixed methods research method course to be taken after you have taken a qualitative and a quantitative course. Using that as a mixed method training. And in that course, I use this graph. This may be familiar to some of you, to describe our like a research planning and framing. And in our education research, whether you're working on teacher learning, or student learning, or science, or language literacy, or even out of school, and of most important area of thinking is around the educational problem. So what kind of educational problem really like seem to be interesting to you? And it's a burning issue. It's a pressing issue that we need to work on and solve in order to make progress in the education field. What are some problems like that related to your research topic? This is not just a gap in the literature. It's really an educational problem. I'm going to share with you some of the possible kind of problems. One problem, for example, is about this persistent learning gap, right? Schools everywhere, and in the US and in other countries as well, we see big gaps in achievement. And of course, that's a major problem that needs to be solved or better solved through education reform. But we really need, it's not just a matter about distributing resources. It's about pedagogical knowledge, because of our education system in the setup and in the design of curriculum and how we approach teaching, we tend to target the average, right? And that's how we kind of assessing the student potential and think about who are the average student and spend most of our time targeting that group of students. And as a teacher, we do not have the time to really like help each individual. So at least we help the group as a whole. So anyway, the problem like a persistent educational gap is a big problem, and it can have different meanings, different reflections in the different curriculum or educational area. And you can think about that, really think about like what's the knowledge gap related to the educational problem. What kind of a pedagogical issues or processes that we really don't like understand enough, or need a new understanding, a new perspective. And so identify educational problem, help to drive our research and drive, focus our energy on a particular direction, and think about the other three important layers or circles of our research work. One is conceptual, second is design, third is about analysis. So basically, as a researcher, there are issues that keep kind of bothering us, right? Almost, if you identify some of the big problems in education, you keep wondering about those things tend to pop up in the mind when you are eating your dinner, right? Or chatting with friend, or maybe just waking up early morning. You realize, okay, I have some new idea about why that problem. And so then we think about conceptual in terms of what's the conceptual framing, what's the conceptual perspective on that? What's the new approach to solve that problem? So the conceptual help us to understand the nature of the problem, as well as the reasons and the possible solutions. And it's not just finding a better solution oftentimes, sometimes just need a new way to think about this. For example, related to achievement gap, we have two important framing, right? The more classical or earlier framing tend to consider achievement gap from the deficit kind of an angle in terms of some students are falling behind. Some students do not have the needed fundamental skills of reading, writing in order to succeed at a higher grade level. So basically identifying the gaps and then finding ways to particularly help those students. But those students are the learners who need help. And a new way to think about this is actually think about not only just the deficit, but also think about the strengths. And those learners who turn to kind of lag behind in our educational space, maybe not necessarily just that they are lacking skills, but because they carry the kind of life experiences and thinking styles and like special skills or talent even that are not well recognized in our educational space, right? And we know that education tends to favor analytical thinking. Learners who are relatively kind of willing to slow down, reflect, unpack things into small things, be sensitive to small details, and memorize the small details in an accurate way, tend to perform better in our educational space. The students who are more intuitive, almost like fast thinking, they can get to a direction very quickly, but oftentimes not reflecting enough, tend to like perform lower. Doesn't mean that their intelligence or their ability is low, but sometimes simply the mismatch in a lot of areas. And of course, we know cultural, racial background can play a big role too. Some of the students from some of the cultural background carry their own cultural strengths, but not oftentimes used as a resource in our educational design. And for example, pop music, probably is, can be a strength of a student, but our language and literature may not, art may not always value that type of art. And so there is probably opportunity to reconsider this and create bridges for cultural modeling. So, and that's a way to think about this, not on a new way to understand the issue, oftentimes point to a different way to approach and solve the problem. And so you want to know, one is to search for possible perspective of viewing it, and the other is to really develop approach to solve that problem, or better solve that problem. As you work on the solution, we come to the another dimension of thinking, which is design thinking. So conceptual thinking is more like a theory driven, right? And design thinking is really about putting together a design that can solve problem in the real space, in the real world. For example, if it is about reading in the elementary grade, you would be really designing something that you can bring to the classroom and test it. So design educational practice in the real context and start to test it. And then of course, sometimes it's not just we design things, it's about co-design with the teachers so that we really understand their need and putting together a design that really are both meaningful for research, but also practical and make sense to practitioners as well. And the third circle here is the data analysis in terms of like what are we measuring or analyzing, and how am I going to analyze it, and what a data analysis method I will be using, and also if I have some funding, coding and statistical difference. Imagine I'm going to get those results, but so what? right? How am I going to find something important, develop interpretation and the conclusion or claim, so-called claims, and through that. So anyway, this is the different layers of thinking that we integrate in planning our research project. And so eventually, if we have a well-defined and planned research project, all these 4 pieces should be coherent, speaking to each other nicely. The problem naturally match with this particular theory. It's good for thinking and about that problem. And the design is guided by the theory, and the design context provide the data source where I can collect data, right? And the data really is looking at the particular conceptual issues, be sensitive to the theory as well. And so that's our ideal goal of a designing project to be strong in each component, but also coherent as a whole. But the problem is that our research thinking oftentimes does not lead to a coherent, clean framing through the first round, the first pass. It's a gradual and iterative process to eventually get to a clean, like a whole design for a research project. That's why as we design work on the project, oftentimes there are a lot of uncertainty and it's a lot of risk. And some of the initial ideas about conceptual framing may not give you the depth you need, and you need to integrate other theory. And the design you put together for a reading, for a math program, you realize actually it doesn't work actually that way. You need to change. And data analysis, you plan some data collection for data collection plan, but you realize that you do not have enough time, or maybe the school doesn't have enough, does not allow you, give you the space to collect that type of data. So you have to improvise. So as we work on research, we need to be flexible, open-minded, but also willing to change and adjust, going through that iterative process. And if we have to fail, we want to fail early, not in the major phase of your project or during your major dissertation work, right? And we want to so-called fail early and fail forward. So being a researcher means that we want to take that risk. If everything is just work out as planned, the whole research process is less exciting and it will be not creative at all. The creative part of being a researcher is to play with that space of uncertainty. Maybe a little bit slow here. Hopefully this makes sense. And so that's just putting the pilot study in this whole context of developing a research project or even a long-term research program. And you keep thinking about those 4 circles of things and taking note of the thought, and sometimes start to put things in writing. And pilot study is an important tool for us to refine our research idea and start to build that coherent framing or planning for a research project. The term pilot study referred to a mini version of a full-scale study. And so basically, you use this, do it at a smaller scale so that you can have a better plan, a better capacity building for your full-scale study. For example, your final dissertation research. Or maybe down the road, when you develop a larger project, develop grant proposals for a National Science Foundation or other funders, and you want to have pilot study before that to really test the water. And it also provides the kind of a testing for specific research instrument, such as your questionnaire or maybe interview protocol. So this is one aspect of pilot study is to use a smaller version of it to test the full design. And the other is purposefully targeting the testing of specific research tools. So with that in mind, I'm going to think about, talk to you about how you can possibly use the pilot study well to develop your research project. I highlight a few things you can test and refine through your pilot study. The first is to test and refine the whole research plan. As you develop your research plan, for example, your dissertation, you're going to develop the research questions, right? And then a particular research plan or protocol process to investigate those research questions. And oftentimes, the first round, first pass of generating research questions can be rough. And you can be quite open-ended with a list of research questions. And then you probably need to test the research questions by collecting data. Collecting data may be only at a smaller scale with a few participants, with a small group. And then you can see what kind of data you can have and whether that type of research question are one researchable, second, is that meaningful for this particular learning or teaching setting. So research question can be refined through the pilot testing. And the same for your research plan and protocol in terms of what research method we will use. Oftentimes, you're probably going to use integration of qualitative with quantitative. And what will be the qualitative data sources you use? What will be the quantitative? And how they really can be mixed together. And how the different sources will help you answer the different research questions. So that can be tested through the pilot study. And some of you may be thinking about testing a particular educational intervention. Let's say design a program for foreign language learning, developing a technology tool to support online learning. So if you are designing a new intervention or new tool, for sure you're going to need to go through iterative cycles. Put together something, test it, and refine it. At least they probably need 2 or 3 cycles to really have education intervention or program worthwhile for a full-scale dissertation research. And sometimes it's about feasibility. You don't know what kind of barrier you're going to encounter. How much time would school allow me to actually do this research? If you include the pre and post test, and I can how much time would they allow? So a lot of practical issues, including the willingness of a teacher. And you can train yourself or train your research team through working together on the mini version of your research. So those are the things more on the intellectual side really help you to think through about the research plan. And second is about the research method testing. Sometimes you may use a pilot study to assess the sampling technique. How can you get student participant involved? Where can you recruit, right? And how can you make sure the recruitment of participant actually give you the sample that you need to answer a research question? And small details may need to work out to really reach out to the participant and making sure it makes sense to them. And you may need to develop and test research instrument, as we said earlier, observation protocol, if you're observing in the classroom. What kind of observation will you carry out? Interview questions can be pilot tested too. This is my experience. A lot of times we feel like we have good questions to ask, but when we bring those questions to a 5th grader, and they just feel confused about what we are asking. Also, not sometimes clear, but they are simply do not have much to say about those questions. So it really makes sense to go through a pilot testing before we spend hours and hours to conduct the interview, transcribe, and later realize actually there's not much in the data at all. So you want to do pilot test early on, so that later when you spend all those hours for data collection and data analysis will be worthwhile. And this, of course, will collect preliminary data you even can analyze. That's the goal of pilot study, is to have a relatively small scale data collection, but can help you test the major component of your dissertation. You can start to assess the data analysis method and see how it works. And see, especially when you're doing a pilot study, you don't have to prove everything work out well and nicely, perfectly. Actually, you should be able to uncover problems and things you find difficult, and things do not unfold or take place as you plan, and identify those almost like a surprises or difficulties, and then you can have a better plan to address those issues in your dissertation. So when you write your paper for pilot study, be honest and reflective about things work well as things that seem to be not working so well and need a better design planning. So that's more like for testing testing the conceptual framing, planning as a whole, testing the empirical sections or component of the project, and the other just simply work out logistical issues, the final goal of the pilot study. And the problem of the implementation, where things seem to be hard, time that needed to collect data and transcribe and analyze your data. And if it's using so much time, probably it makes sense in some of the component you need to narrow down. And resources, what kind, do you need money or pay the participant for them to participate in your research? And how do you want to engage the teachers if we are working in classroom? And the technology can be a kind of an issue too. Data management, how you going, after you have collected all those data, how are you going to organize and manage the data? Data may include things are just numbers like exam scores, and interview and video and audio, maybe like a collection of student writing samples, other classroom artifacts. All those different kind of data sources, how are you going to organize them, store them nicely so that you can easily track and connect, for example, the different data sources, but all related to the same student. How are you going to eventually find out that you're interested in this student? Where are you going to find the different data points related to the same participant? So you probably need to test ways to create organizers, right? So you can start to think about how you're going to manage the data. And I also listed a few resources for applying for funding for graduate study or graduate for dissertation research. You can later check out. I think it's good to apply for small amount of money to support your research. Okay, so that's more the conceptual layer just for the different component of a pilot study, testing conceptual, methodological, and practical things. Any question, any comment before we talk about more detailed things about the milestone?
We've had one comment actually in the Padlet, which is a bit more general, but maybe it might be a good place to sort of frame the next section, which is looking forward to understanding where to begin, where to begin the pilot study. So I think this seems like a good transition here.
Okay, yeah.
To start.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about just in terms of the context of the pilot study. So in the doctoral program of curriculum instruction, we have several milestones, right? You have initial coursework, 12 credit. Then you do the gave review paper, which is a mini, a literature review plus a research direction framing. And then after that, you're going to do more coursework, including the inquiry courses that satisfy the requirement for the inquiry tool exam. And then after you have finished all the credit, 63 credit, and then you work on the comprehensive exam, which is in the form of the pilot study. So this is an exam for the comprehensive exam. And then you move on to the dissertation phase, which is your proposal and your dissertation. And so I am thinking about that, without talking about how to write it yet. So my suggestion is that when you start your dissertation, your doctoral program, you should already think about your research direction and even finding opportunity to start carry out pilot study. And so the important kind of a strategy to do that is you always keep a research journal. Like the journal probably is going to be recording the important problems to tackle in education related to your area, right? What are some big ideas that you're thinking of related to those problems? And when you read the literature and publish articles and books and try to search for the related big ideas, what are the few research teams already working on that type of problem? What kind of a conceptual perspective they're holding or developing? And what kind of research design intervention that they have published. So basically, the four important components for developing a research: problem, conceptual, research method, and design in the real world setting. So those things should be the kind of building blocks that you're accumulating throughout the years in the program. So taking note, oftentimes it can be a brief idea, but in case you're going to lose it if you don't record it. So you put it in your notebook. I oftentimes take a lot of a small note and later compile them together when I feel like, okay, there's few ideas start to make sense. I can spend some time flesh them out in a paragraph long writing, start to see how this is going to work. So pilot study should, the thinking of preparation for your pilot study and the future dissertation really should start from the day one of your dissertation, of your doctoral program. And throughout the program, in the different courses, you may want to be strategic about using the readings assigned by the professors, but help in particular way helping you to develop your research thinking. And not every reading going to be equally relevant and important to every student, right? So basically, you can be strategic in terms of how much time you want to spend on each piece of writing, each piece of reading. And of course, you want to have a general sense, cover level kind of understanding, basically cover the reading. But the readings that really speak to you, relevant to your research thinking, probably are most important to you. You want to spend a lot of time digging into those references and develop your thinking. And unpack a few example studies, really look at how they are collecting data, analyze data to answer relevant questions. And so you accumulate a set of collection of key references over the years that can help you develop both your gateway review paper and the pilot study paper as well. So that's in terms of how you make kind of start the process. Problem driven is very important, and always think about problem to solve. Big idea, think about not just adding another literature, but there are some big idea I can work with. And some theories really help me have a fresh look at this particular issue. And really work with those big ideas offered by the different authors, and think about how those ideas may help you think about this research topic. The third would be like a rigorous use of research method, and look at how they have been implementing, possibly integrating. Sometimes you can be innovative by trying out new data sources or new analysis method. I hope that answered your question a little bit. We can have a conversation later. So just give you, this is all in our guideline, right, for the pilot study. I'm going to just briefly summarize. And the pilot study include introduction kind of a statement. How have you developed through the doctoral study from your initial interest to formulating a particular research direction and test it through this pilot study paper. And some background information about your pilot study, what's it about, and in what context did you conduct that study, and what's your purpose, like pursuing that pilot study? How do you think that that help you develop your dissertation proposal or your research? So you can give the reviewer the background information needed to really understand this pilot study. And then the second part of it is the presentation of a completed study, which is a research paper. A double space, no more than 30 pages, including references. And then there will be a public presentation, 20-minute present. I know oftentimes we go a little longer, probably 30 minutes. And then there's a Q&A. So both your introductory statement, your writing, and your oral presentation will be used as evidence for the evaluation of this exam. So yeah, look at the handbook. I'm going to end with this one. This is our evaluation rubric, right? So basically, when faculty members or the members of committee are looking at your pilot study, we're thinking about your preparation for your dissertation research in terms of your knowledge about this specialized area of inquiry. Do you show enough level of understanding of the conceptual and empirical things already in the field? And that can help you develop your research. And research use of research methodology. And then the actual kind of practical skills about carrying out research, both for data collection and data analysis. And the competency in presenting in terms of your reading, in terms of your writing, as well as your oral presentation. So those are the things we're going to be looking at. Okay, I'm going to end here. So I look forward to our discussion.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Zhang, for the introduction. And actually, we have some questions already in the Padlet. Do you have access to the Padlet? If everyone could just move over to the Padlet.
Let me stop share. We can share the.
Maybe you could share. Could you share the screen, Dr. Zhang, for the Padlet?
Let me see.
Yeah, because I'm also just doing some like posting whilst we're going. So maybe it's better if you share. Yeah, great. Thanks. So one of the questions is just maybe we'll start with the last question because that's most recent compared to what you just talked about. Could the 4 inquiry courses be defined? Like what is meant by the 4 inquiry courses?
In each like a doctoral program on campus, there is a milestone called inquiry tool exam. And in our department, we used to have an exam for that. But recently we decided to allow students to just satisfy that requirement by taking 4 inquiry method, basic research method courses. And the 4 courses have to cover both quantitative method and qualitative. It doesn't have to be 2 + 2. It can be 1 + 3, 3 + 1, depending on your need of the different research method, right? If you're going to be going more towards a quantitative study, probably you need more training in statistics. You can do take more courses in quantitative area. But at least each student will understand both qualitative and quantitative research method. In our department, of course, ETAP 777, 778. Those are typical, the kind of qualitative options. 741 is, or 740, I forgot, 740, 41 is a ETAP version of a quantitative research method. And oftentimes students take research method, statistic courses in education psychology department, right? So those are the possible options for, of course, there are other options as well. Look at our planning sheet and doctoral handbook. I remember a few courses were listed outside of School of Education as well. You guys can share. I know you probably,
Yeah.
some of you may have taken like a good research method courses to take from the different department.
Yeah. The person who asked the question, I want to open it up if they have a follow-up question.
That was me. That makes sense. And I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
I believe in the handbook or the website, there's a list of courses which fall under the category of inquiry courses. I believe Alan may have produced a document recently, but if not, you could send an email to Alan Oliveira. He can give you the ones specifically in our department, the chair. Also, I believe, is it right, Dr. Zhang, that you can choose classes from outside ETAP, which count towards the inquiry courses, is that right?
Yeah, for example, students in your department have taken qualitative courses related to, for example, ethnography in anthropology department, and related to discourse analysis, like verbal data, communication analysis from communication department. Those are good courses to take, yeah.
If you, I took one, for example, in the social work department,
Oh, yeah.
which was to do with action research. So working with communities, doing action research. So you can be creative in terms of like where you look for the inquiry courses too. Typically, it's if it has a, from my understanding, is if it has a emphasis on method rather than content. I'd say that would be perhaps the giveaway of whether it's likely to be included or not. Does anybody else have any other questions about the inquiry courses? Okay, if not, we can go to the IRB question. So we've got a question that says, could we use the prior IRB that have been obtained? So can you use an existing IRB, I think, is that?
Yes, you can. So IRB is for a research project. And so it doesn't, you can, of course, that research project, you can be your pilot study, or can be your dissertation, or can be just a project by itself. But that project give you the data you need to develop your pilot study. And you do not need a special like an IRB just for the pilot.
An example.
And that, I should say that if you haven't done a, IRB better point of your pilot study, then do IRB for the pilot is actually also a good part of the pilot experience as well. So you know how to clarify things related to research ethics.
Kind of formative assessment for yourself.
Yeah. So related to this, I see a new question that's posted. Yeah. Need to plan a pilot study that require IRB approval. I think most of the cases probably will need IRB approval for pilot study. Of course, right? The IRB basically, there are a few factors to consider. One is this pilot study going to be presented in a public forum? Do you expect this pilot study to be even, I would definitely encourage you guys, even for the pilot study or for even like a research project, mini research project in your classes, you want to try to make them as high potential as possible, and not just do it for the purpose of meeting a requirement, but turn it into a conference paper, turn it into even a journal paper, right? And be strategic with, you spend so much time with this and on this, so you should make it as valuable as possible. And so IRB would allow you, for example, to turn a pilot study paper into a submission to AERA, maybe another conference. So you should like try to go through the IRB process so that pilot study will have a real value. Of course, some of the pilot study may be using existing data, and just a secondary analysis of existing data does not need a new IRB. So that will be good to save some time for that. But if you have that's only possible if you have an existing data set to work on.
Technically, obviously, it's better to have the IRB, but what about, is it possible to complete the pilot study without the IRB if you need to? Is that possible?
I haven't thought that like very explicitly. I think probably you can. Need probably communicate with the IRB, write to the IRB office confirming on that. If IRB is only for like a publicly shared research work. If the research is only for a class, internal presentation, doing for a grade in the class, you do not need a formal IRB protocol. But oftentimes, for example, when I teach a class like that, I have a communication with IRB office, let them know that we're actually analyzing data, sometimes maybe interviewing participant, but this is only for training research skill, and the paper will not be presented or published outside of the class. And they will allow us to do that without a formal IRB protocol. So if that's the case, you only do this for exam and not ever going to be shared, probably is doable without IRB. It's worthwhile to let IRB office know that you're only collecting data for exam.
Obviously,
So I just went through last semester and submitted my IRB for my pilot study, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. And it was incomplete and not in the correct format. And I somehow missed the instructional document. And so I just found stuff on the web and thought I was doing it correctly. And they rejected it. And so I've spent this semester working on it exactly the way that they say that it has to be done, including naming the files and format of the files and making sure that I have every single little piece. And what I didn't understand is that basically you have to have everything done before you can fill out your IRB. You have to have your survey instrument designed. You have to send them a link to it. You have to have, be able to explain it. And they ask very specific questions. And I didn't know or understand. I mean, I learned as a result of doing it. I'm very glad that I did it and they rejected it, and it forced me to go and figure it out. So now I have everything except I'm pre-testing my survey right now. And so I have everything done except the link to the final survey. And so I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks to be able to submit it. And, I'm hoping that it's all correct. They're very nice. They answer questions and everything.
Do we have any more questions from the people who submitted the IRB questions originally? Thanks for sharing your experience. That really helps to contextualize it. Do the people who posted the questions have any follow-up questions? Okay, if you do, you can just add them into the chat box. And there's another one which I think I can associate with, which is a challenge, is how can we conduct selective readings since there's a huge amount of papers that seem to be related to our research problem? It seems the more you read, the more you realize you don't know and you have to keep reading. So
there are a lot out there.
It's very consequential. So how do we cope with that? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think that's a good question for our, researcher kind of mind. A lot of the time we need to manage and balance. There are a lot of good stuff out there. Every time I say, oh, that's a good article, I should come back to read. But probably a lot of time, most of the time, I will not find the time to really go back and read it carefully. So in my experience, I have probably like 2 or 3 lines of research, and somehow they're connected, but each involve slightly different lines of literature. For example, I work on collaborative learning, right? How students collaborate and talk to develop scientific ideas. And I work on teacher, like a teacher scaffolding and how teachers shift their role from a more traditional teacher to a teacher who can support student collaboration. And I also work on technology. So each side involves its own kind of body of literature. Of course, they're all connected. So in my experience, I would have the kind of organizer for this 3 lines of literature. And not in each area, as I start to work on the area in the beginning, I may feel like there are a lot of articles and I read maybe 5 or 6 or 10. But as I start to work on the literature, I would start to see big ideas. Typically I search for big idea. I do not just read a paper because it's also relevant to a topic. I may scan through, right? I know that some researchers are also working on that. But some of the articles I do not feel like they give me a big idea to give me a fresh look, almost eye-opening kind of framework to rethink about this issue. And big ideas tend to be the papers that present good work on theories. And if you can start to, as I work on the literature related to a topic, the major theories start to stand out. And maybe there are not many theories out there, especially powerful ones. Maybe there are just 2 or 3, mostly related to your work. And people, when they are really come to a conceptual framing, they're basically in different ways reframing or like focusing on different aspects of that theory. So that can start to give you a sense of like really accumulate a few like readings that can help you advance your conceptual thinking, theory level thinking. You feel like it's a big idea. For example, in the area of collaborative learning, one big concept about collaborative learning is called collective knowledge. Tom would be familiar with this. If you others taking class with me, I talk about that a lot. So knowledge being a collective product, not just knowledge in the mind, but knowledge can reside outside the mind. That's a big idea for me to think about like a collaborative work on knowledge building. Because a lot of time when we think about knowledge, we're thinking about how we can better understand, better think, better memorize, better use. So all those action verbs are pointing to the knowledge in the mind. But knowledge outside the mind is actually more important for the society. Teams work together to like generate knowledge represented in a public space and put them in the statement. Like a team would be working on a draft of a proposal, right? And a team of designers would build their prototype, and the prototype become a shared artifacts that connect and anchor all of our thinking together. So collective knowledge becoming a big idea for me to rethink almost everything about how we learn socially. It's not just peer helping peers to learn here. The learning is an all-side process. That's discourse, interaction, build on, sharing, raise above, cross-referencing, and artifact building, like having a longer time, like a tracing of how artifact change, not just our memorized information change. So that's an example, like organized information, but purposefully focus on big ideas from theories that help you to rethink about things. And the other is focusing on the method that really demonstrate this almost state of art of research practice for investigating this topic in terms of the research design, the research method, the kind of data analysis methods people tend to use, and purposefully identify like publications, studies that have appeared in good outlet, right? The best, the most like a selective, like reputable journals. And that tend to have gone through more rigorous peer review and hard to get in, tend to have a larger impact. So look at how those studies have been conducted and give you a particular look at not only the research method section, how they write about it, but also when you read a research method section, you start to think about what's the research work behind this. The research work behind this writing is a lot messier, I know, than the clean kind of a presentation presented here. You have to almost think about the actual work that the team has gone through to be able to come to this level and create this publication. So theory, accumulating big ideas around theory related to the problem or topic, and identify the best publication out there related to this topic. And the third probably is related to this is identifying the leading research teams out there, right? Know who are the leading players in this area and look at their most recent work and what recent research project, what's the recent project they're working on. The things they published maybe at least 5 years ago, but look at their website. What are their current project? Likely their project going to be leading to publication in the next 3 years. So you can have a better sense of really so-called working at the cutting edge, right? So as in the doctoral program, you should feel like you're at the cutting edge. You're not just absorbing, tons of information for you to absorb. You will never be able to absorb, all the information. But when you start to have these key references, I would say start to be working in a generative mode, producing knowledge, not just absorbing. And there are going to be other references you will encounter and you need to read, but do not feel like you have to read everything and know everything in order to publish. The most important things for you to position your research work in a publication in the field is to know the big ideas, the key frameworks for designing and conducting a particular type of research, and feel like you're dialoguing with the major players. And you have that sense, you should start to contribute, not just feel like you have to know everything, every piece. And that's on that side, I feel like reading should not be so time consuming. When you start to be strategic with your reading, do not just try to read every book, every article. Only read the article, read the book because that helps you become a better researcher, not because there's just another good thing to read. Of course, if we have time, but we don't have that much time to really read everything. Be strategic and use all the things that you read, you collect, you accumulate, always for the purpose of advancing your research agenda, and so that you can contribute to this a context or area of work.
So it kind of seems like the reading process is almost a bit like the data analysis process, in that once you start to feel you're noticing categories, for example, the types of methods typically used around the types of questions that you ask. Once you start to exhaust those and you start to see the common pattern, you've then got the summary, and then you can start to get a sense that probably you've seen enough of one thing, and then you can start to say that this is now saturated and typically my type of research interview or case study, like that kind of thing, I think. Does anybody, we've got another comment, I think it's quite similar actually about the reading. Do either of the reading posters, the people who posted the reading comments, have anything they'd like to share or ask in relation to that, or anybody else based on the comments so far? Okay, if so, you can always add it in the document. Got another one coming in. Thanks very much for keeping the questions coming. There's one, does the dissertation need to be on the same topic as the pilot? Can you see that question there?
Yeah, I see that question. You do not, it's not mandatory. You your committee will not hold you accountable. You have to do this for your dissertation. But that will be a kind of an ideal situation, because if you change a topic, likely going to like spend extra time for sure. But if you realize after the pilot that you feel like, okay, I'm not going to exactly do this for my dissertation, and you have the option to do that for sure.
Would you say that most people's studies, even if it's on the same topic, change between the dissertation and the pilot process?
The examples I have seen, most of them are somewhat related. Some of them are really like a pilot study. Actually, at the time they submit the pilot study, they are already actually working on the proposal and even data collection for dissertation. So really, the submission of the pilot is only for the purpose of meeting the requirement of the exam. Their research work is already ahead of them. And so that would be like a very closely aligned with their actual dissertation. Some of them are, still in the same research topic kind of area, but data collection plan and specific research questions will be different. So do not feel bad if you realize you actually need to change your topic for all kinds of reasons, right? Maybe the pilot is a good kind of feedback to help you realize that, okay, I'm not going to spend, so many hours on this topic. I need a different one. If it turns out not to be the ideal topic you want to work on.
Got another one here that's come in. Thanks for that. There's another one that's come in that says, what is the average time it takes to complete the pilot study?
I don't know. You guys who have gone through this process, maybe.
Yeah, maybe you could throw it out to people. I think there's some board members here from ETAP DocS who've done it. Would you like to share how long it took you, if you don't mind sharing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I say?
Please. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, actually, it takes 6 months to complete the pilot for me. But before that, I have to change in my research methodology. But for the first 6 months, I wanted to get the data from another center, and there might be some problem because of the bureaucratic situation. So I have to change my topic. So actually, it takes 1 year, and the first plan was finished, and the second plan takes 6 months.
So there's some changes.
Yeah, some of them, I would encourage you to consider preparing for each of the milestones in your coursework. If you have done a pilot study, this level or scale of study in one of the research method courses, and you can further develop it into this pilot study paper, that will be a good way to use your time. So anyway, I think both for your reading, for the courses you take, you turn everything that you do in the program, in the coursework, for advancing your research, both for meeting the milestones and also really like developing your research project. We have a few other questions.
Yeah, some of the stuff is resources too, and like just recap. So they're
yeah, I'm gonna share a resource with about research framing and writing.
Yeah, great. If you could put it inside the that comment section, that'd be really great. Thanks. Does anybody else like to share their thoughts or questions whilst we're just doing that? We've got about.
I see one. Is there a kind of sequence for reading papers, like conclusion, discussion, methodology, if possible? At least review.
Is that like the strategy of how to efficiently read research papers? If you were to read a research paper, Dr. Zhang, what steps would it be? You've downloaded it. What would you do next?
I have different levels of reading. I subscribe the new issue alert of a few journals, the top journals in my field. So whenever they have a new issue, and they will send me the list of articles in email, right? So typically I will scan through the titles and know that, okay, there are some titles, topics investigated in the research field. And sometime I found a particular paper interesting, I would open the link to read the abstract. And probably most of the reading at this stage, at this point, will be ending up just reading the abstract. And I know those papers. So later, if I really work on a project related to that, I will come back to get their full text and do deeper reading. But otherwise, it's good to know. So I will get the information. And when I really read like a few articles, greater detail, I typically have a purpose. I either want to better understand, the conceptual. I would really look at how that author presented that theoretical framework and how that construct or compare with other related theories. And what's the way of using that theory to particularly guide a design of intervention or like a data analysis. So I'm going to really unpack in the conceptual section if that really what I want to learn from that paper. Other times, if the paper is really about like the research method, I want to incorporate a new research method, and I haven't used that method before. So then I will really focus on the method section, right? So depending on what you really want to get from that paper, how you want to build onto it, and that will you want to be like a strategic in terms of how you read it. And most of the time, I would really come to a paper with a purpose. Some papers really just good papers to read. I may read it from beginning to end, but that kind of reading not that often, only for very selective cases to read that level. What are your reading strategy? Anyone you found helpful, you can share with us here.
So I got some, I think it was Yin Kong who asked the question. They said really helpful. Thank you. Does anybody else have any sort of strategies or reading tips or things that you typically do?
I typically look at the title and the abstract, and then I jump to the discussion and the conclusion to try and understand, is this really something that that is going to help me to understand something better or differently? And then really I only read the whole paper if I'm doing a literature review and I want to understand something very specific within the paper. And I keep track of things in a Google spreadsheet so that I can remember where I saw something. I might even take quotes and mark the page, because the worst thing is you read something that's really, really good, but you can't remember what paper you wrote it, you read it in, and you can't find it again. So I have learned to keep track, and I have the link to the paper, the title of the paper. I always do the citation, so I don't have to mess with that later. And then I'll do some quotes and the page number. It helps me to organize. Also, then after I've gathered a few papers, I can categorize them also, and the spreadsheet helps me to do that easily.
Excel, yeah. One thing that I've done recently is I have my research question in mind and think, how does this paper address my research question? And that's a way I try to keep focused on the papers that I'm reading, because sometimes you open a paper and you think, oh, it's very interesting. But then like the questions we were talking about before about the huge amount of papers, if the paper itself is not applicable to my research question, I try to move away from it too, as well as focusing on the results and the discussion too. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? We've got about 5 minutes left before we have to sort of round up. is there any top tips from people who've done their pilot? If you were to do it again, any tips that you'd like to share? Jennifer has also written a comment in the chat box saying that you learned early on in the studies to use a chart to keep track of the information. Yeah, like Excel. Jennifer, typically, what do you use, Jennifer? Have you got any tips?
Well, I learned in, I guess it was one of Dr. Barnes' courses that I took with her. That was my first course, and then revisited that philosophy in Dr. Puccioni's class of using a chart to compile information similar to what was just said, you know, all the different key pieces of information, just to keep track of everything, because I think you do come across so much important information and so much that can be helpful. And I think particularly for someone like myself, who's rather, you know, in the early stages of this process, you never know what information you're going to come across that you may want to refer to later. So a spreadsheet of sorts, you know, to just keep track of everything. So
yeah. In the spreadsheet as well, do you have like categories? What kind of categories do you use in the spreadsheet?
So similar to what you would just find in an article, really. Methodology, findings, conclusions, you know, just the key pieces of information. Theory, that has been very helpful for me, especially considering that I am early in this process. And that has been one of the harder or the more challenging things to grapple with. So that has been very helpful as well. So.
That's great, yeah. And also, if you've got it in the Excel, you can then look for those patterns that you were talking about before, like typically what kind of methods are they using? You say, oh, look, this type of method, it seems very common. And then you can, when you're doing your meta discussion of the topic, you can say typically, with confidence, you can say typically, this method is used, because you can see it's quite common. Like that might be useful too. Yeah.
I think it also does make it a little bit more objective, especially when you're, you know, myself just learning all of this. It's a lot to learn. And that just makes it a little bit more objective as far as finding the information. So that is helpful.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, we have a question related to writing. I want to share with you the final slides here. And let me share the screen again. So, and we talk about like how you want to like really work on the writing of your product. And research, a pilot study kind of writing is really the core is really about this set of a component, right? I think it's begin with organizer. Of course, in the beginning may not as a need, but you start to try using this as organizer. So your research goal and your framing of it, and how that framing map onto your research question. And so you can have, let's say, 2 or 3 research questions, and each have their corresponding data sources that you can use to investigate. And then you can also elaborate the analysis method for the different data sources. And what do you kind of not necessarily hypothesis, but at least a sense of the outcome, right? Is that going to be a coding, or is that going to be a storytelling, like a narrative approach? Is that going to be statistical difference, correlation? So you get a sense of the key output. And then you can also think about early on, how does this output going to help answer my research question? In terms of how do I interpret the significance of it, right? Or even how do I know whether that actually answered my question? So you kind of start to think about all these different layer of things. Use this as an organizer. If you can build this well, and then you can put it in the full writing for the whole paper, from the literature review to your research method, and all the way to the key output and the interpretation of it, basically is your finding and discussion. So I want to share this as our last slide. A few of you have seen this. It's called U is a beautiful shape for writing a journal article. I would say it's writing for empirical study. And you begin with relatively general introduction open to a broader audience. Here, there should be no jargon and should be readable to a broader field of education researchers, even practitioners, to introduce the problem and the topic and the context why that's important. So that's the introduction, right? Set up the stage for a topic, identify the problem, and say you're going to answer, solve this problem through this research, and it's important because of this and that. So at this level, it should be for general audience. And then as you move to a literary review, the U shape kind of drop down to a deeper level. Here become more specialized. The jargons may start to pop up, more technical readers can understand. And the written literature, the term, the theory, that's going to come along. And that's the literary review. The literary review should get you to the design of the study, which is your research question and your research method, analysis, and the coding, the finding. So that's the down to the bottom. The deepest part of your research is your own research, the research method, the data analysis, and the result. So that's really the core part of your research, but only like a readable or understandable through this kind of a channel, moving from a broader context, coming down here. If you throw a reader to this directly, the reader will get confused and not find interesting at all. It become interesting because of this context. You want to move along, build this kind of a gradual chain, guiding the reader from a broader context to this body of research and to this particular pilot study or your dissertation later. And then you move up on the right-hand side, which is based on the result. You can be having your discussion. The discussion will be developing conclusions, claims related to your research question, but seem to be meaningful to this body of literature on the left side, right? So discussion is speaking through the result, speaking with the literature. What's new? What have you found out? How does that advance the literature? And how is it similar or different? And what's new and important, right? And then that's the discussion section. And from here to conclusion and implication, that's stand up high again. In this section you're writing, it speak to a general audience again, but build on what you have learned from this study. It shouldn't be opinion, shouldn't be just talking about literature, get to the conclusion. It's really about your study, the discussion, the claim you have developed, and speak to the broader audience. How does that help us better understand learning or teaching? People who may not be researching that small topic, but care about learning, teaching, design, online learning, assessment in general, right? And how does that speak to practitioners, policymakers, technology developers, wherever you want to use your research to develop practice and advance education? What can they learn from this work? So this will be at the conclusion and the implication section. So you see your writing is from like a general guiding the reader through the literature to your study, and develop like focused claim well supported by the data, and then use that as the evidence, as the support to develop a bigger argument. And we know at this level, it's a bigger argument, right? This can be bigger than your small claim, but your small claim cannot be too broad. It has to be particularly supported by the evidence. And so this is a kind of I think it's a good way to think about this. And I have a link here. I'm going to share this in our chat. And when you go to this link, it's a PDF. There are a few other pages, and also talking about how to use this U-shape to organize presentation of a quantitative study, of a mixed method study. of a qualitative study. So you can look at this. I think it's a good, simple, a very simple kind of a shape. But it's a useful tool for us to think about how we organize our writing and develop that so-called flow of thought, right? It's a flow of thought. It's not just throw my work to you. You have to like it, but you guide the reader through that flow and into your research work, so that the reader will also appreciate the complex work that you have done and not be overwhelmed. Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks so much for sharing that, Dr. Zhang. I've added it to the document. Please use this document as a working document for you as you're going forward. Other people have been sharing stuff. I've been trying to add it in there. And I think this is going to be really helpful for all of us with the documents and what we've produced here collectively in today's session. It's something that we can go back to and keep working. Also, just before we finish, every second Sunday of the month, we have the research forum, which is basically a space where you can bring your own research. So please, as you're developing your research, or even just have questions about like what you think you might want to do, the research forum is definitely the place for you to come and share your ideas and talk about your research. The idea is that together, through talking about doing research, we can make our research better through peer support and reviewing each other's work and engaging in discussion about it. Some people in the session tonight have been along to the sessions on Sundays, and everybody is welcome to keep coming back whenever they want to. As you leave tonight's session, hopefully you can go back to those first comments that you had at the beginning, or thoughts that you had at the beginning of what did I want to get out of it today. If you could go back to those thoughts and start to think about how you can start to put it in motion and use that document that we've shared, the Padlet, as well as using the peer research forum, which you can find the information for on the ETAP DocS website. You can come there as well to practice or develop the research. Thank you so much, Dr. Zhang, for spending a lot of your valuable time tonight with us. And thanks everybody else for coming late in the evening to come. Mary, I think we have something to share with Dr. Zhang, but then I think because we're virtual, so we'll get something to you to say thank you for tonight. We appreciate all of your help and support. Always a great partner in what we're trying to do. If there's no other questions or comments, please feel free to leave now, and don't forget to keep coming back and keep working together in the community to sort of develop everything we're trying to do and keep being a supportive community member by being involved. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, Professor. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, be creative. Look forward to your research.